So let's say you have created something and it has been validated, but then what happens from that point in time onwards? You have the original and you have the whole brain emulation.
Hmm.
How do you treat each of these? Do you have to destroy the original? Do you give the quote replica or the copy the same rights that you would give the original? Is there some kind of a, I don't know, hierarchy between a second generation copy and a third generation copy of the copy?
Hmm. Well, from our perspective, I think a lot of the things you can already sense just by saying them that they don't make a lot of sense when you say them, right? Like this whole hierarchy of who's more valuable, what do you base that on? Um, let's start with, is it really you? Which is really a question that comes up a lot. And the interesting thing is it depends on at least your philosophy. So first of all, it depends on what you think is you. This is not very easily solved. You can look at a lot of the work by David Chalmers on that. That it's not entirely clear whether you need to worry about continuity. So does there have to be a continuity between your biological self and the replica that's operating? Or is it completely okay to just put a huge separation in there? You build this entirely separately somewhere on the side and then activate it, and then it's you. Um, that's not entirely clear. And I was a fence sitter on this for a long time. And I've gotten a little better because I spoke with Max Moore, who gave me this. He did a thesis, so basically, on personal identity. And so he looked at all of these aspects. And one of the interesting things that he came up with is that it's really not so much about the process that you use or the procedure. It's more about how abrupt, how much are the differences. Because you yourself are now not the same person that you were when you were 5 years old. The reason why it is still you is because it's been a gradual change. It's not suddenly going from 5-year-old you to tomorrow it's you who you are now. Those would be completely different people. So it's about this gradual nature. If you made a whole brain emulation and it woke up in a black box and it had no sensation and everything was suddenly different, this could be way too disruptive. That you might not want to consider that you. If basically nothing seems different and you're waking up and you look around and, hey, oh, okay, so that worked, then there's not too much change all at once. So this is more the direction I'm taking right now in my view of personal identity and continuity of self, though I still do worry about whether the process matters, because you can imagine doing something like whole brain emulation in many different ways. So you could build the replica entirely separately, or you could do an in-place replacement of one neuron at a time. And those are different because in the case of the replacement in place, there's never a moment where you get turned off and on, or where it's very clear that you're just suddenly making this new physical entity. So they're different in procedure. Then you asked, is it okay to turn off the biological version? Well, again, I guess the procedure matters there a little bit because you might not even have that option. But I don't see any reason why you would. It's kind of like, okay, so even if they both are you to begin with and then start experiencing different things, which is fine, it's just you going in different ways you could go, right? Like we all have different paths in life that we could take. Um, why would one be less valuable than the other and it'd be okay to turn them off? I don't get that. It's like, it's like two people or twins. Why would you kill a twin? It doesn't make any sense.
But the issue is for example, if I have a mind upload and the original is still in existence,
Yeah.
which one of them is my wife's husband legally and practically?
Yeah.
And
I
and,
can see
and
those
if
legal
the
issues.
original
Yeah.
disappears and there's 2 or 3 or 4 uploads of me, identical copies of the copy, which one is the one?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
we differentiate between them? If I have kids, which one would be their father?
Yeah.
If I legally place my upload to be my heir, which one would be the heir?
Hmm.
All those sort of maybe paradoxical and crazy, but in a deep sense, ethical issues I think
Right.
are very important. So that's actually the angle that I'm coming at it from, because I'm not a scientist. I don't really care too much about the technical end of things. For me, the more important questions are why rather than how, why, and then so what. So what is like the biggest
Okay,
question
well,
for
we can
me?
get to the so what afterwards, but we should deal with some of the ethical things that you brought up first and some of the legal questions that you brought up first.
So, for example, Charlie Strauss, I remember in one of my favorite books, Accelerando, raised the question, if a mind-uploaded Muslim eats a virtual bacon, is he breaking the Quran or not?
I would say yes.
But
I
that's
mean,
not really bacon because it's not coming from pig, you see. It's
or it's all in
virtual.
the definition of really. It's like so many things in any scripture. You need to decide how you're going to interpret it, and then you can base your answer on that. That's part of the problem, right?
And
One
then
of the
if you
things,
delete a copy, is that a murder?
again, it's a matter of how you look at these things, and yeah, we have to deal with that as a society. The thing that I find so interesting about so many questions related to new technology, including this kind of technology, is that very often it gets approached as if it's some really new thing that we've never faced before. We've never faced these kinds of questions before, when in reality it's just another variant of questions that we've dealt with all the time. So, for example, the matter of death and is it okay to kill someone? In the past, that really used to depend on who they were and what their position in life was. Like if you were a nobleman and a peasant offended you, maybe it was okay to kill them. And if you had a slave, that was an entirely different matter too. Sure, it was, destruction of property, but it's not the same thing. Now we've evolved from there by changing our ethics and saying, okay, that's not right. We should really treat them all as equal. Everyone has these inalienable rights, etc. And perhaps we can evolve further to look at this also when we talk about people made up of different substrates. Is it the fact that this person is running on some other hardware very much different than them having a different color of skin? Well, you should really think about that. But I don't think that these problems are unique. I don't think that they're that new in law. And all the other stuff about who is your wife's husband. Again, this is one of those things where we can look at some similar precedents when it's about things like polygamy versus monogamy and harems and all these other situations that have existed, and just choices that you make about how you lead your own life. But then, for instance, what about her choice? What if, for instance,
Exactly.
for her, it's not so much about, is this the person that I like to talk to, but I like him to have that body there. Or maybe she doesn't like your body. Maybe she prefers, one of the others. I don't know. The point being, that it also involves her choice, her wants and needs, and so it's a more complicated question on one hand, but on the other hand, it's also a more familiar question because it's really about our decisions, what we think as people and as a society are the correct results. Laws, sure, they should get updated and rewritten and changed as necessary to deal with what we think is right given the new circumstances that we're in. And that happens for everything, for genetically modified foods to uploading. So I don't really see that that's any different.
So let me ask you this then, just continuing along that path of scientific development. Let's say we succeed in creating a whole brain emulation. Do you think that it wouldn't be very far afterwards that we could be able to do the reverse process, which is to say to take that emulation and install it, for lack of a better word, on a clean body, for example, as the
Yeah,
carrier?
I don't spend as much time working on that part of it just because the data acquisition part is already so hard. But I do see that it's very important, and I think that it's definitely the first thing that people will want to perfect as soon as you have some way of doing an upload to a substrate-independent mind. Sometimes the body you want to enter will be different than what we have now because maybe you are trying to travel to Alpha Centauri and you'd rather be a spaceship than be a human. But
Or you just want to make your wife happy?
if that's the kind of thing she likes, yeah, okay. But but certainly, and this is actually one of these big questions. People always come to me with, but isn't it going to be a problem that a substrate-independent mind doesn't have a body? And then I kind of wonder why they made that assumption in the first place. Does this have something to do with popular culture or movies or something that's been said about uploading before, which is one of the reasons I don't really like the term. It's very confusing. There's nothing in there that says anything about not having a body. I think that embodiment is essential because we're not just what's in here. So much about the world is being computed for us by the universe around us. Like, even just think about some primitive animal tracking prey. Most of the time it's going to try to predict a little bit ahead, but it won't compute the perfect path, making a model of what that prey that it's chasing is like and how it's going to try to evade it and things. Instead, it looks and gets feedback about where the prey is now and adjusts itself to that. This is all computation being carried out in that environment by other things, not by yourself. So the input and output is really important.
Yeah, my presumption would be that if we are so sophisticated as to be able to do and successfully complete the whole brain emulation, then the reverse process should be much faster and much easily accomplished than the original process.
That's my assumption as well.
And it wouldn't be too far away from that point.
Yeah.
So you agree with that? That's interesting.
Yes, I do, yeah.
And let me ask you this then: do you read any science fiction writers that could potentially inform your work in one way or another? Is that a possibility at all? And if you do, who are your favorites?
If I inform my work, as in the things that I could learn from, or that other people could read to get an idea of what's...
In the sense that it could either inspire you, or it could bring to light some of the implications of your work that you haven't considered before, or it could help you come up with new and creative approaches of accomplishing your goals.
Yeah. Well, as you already heard, it all started with a science fiction story. Although, I'd been thinking about things before then, but that science fiction story really crystallized where to go. And since then, yeah, I've read quite a bit of science fiction, but in the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years, I've had very little time to do any recreational reading, so there hasn't been as much. But I must say that I have taken out a little bit of time to read some Greg Egan, because I really, really like his work. And yeah, so I would suggest that, yeah, you can learn a bit about at least what sort of issues you need to deal with and what's going on in emulation when you read something like Permutation City. So that's the kind of place where you could go and look and get some inspiration.
Because I personally have come across Cory Doctorow and Charlie Stross and Robert J. Sawyer and a number of other science fiction writers who have spent a lot of time thinking of the process and the implication of mind uploading. So I thought it would be interesting to see if you sort of, and they raise lots of the ethical and sort of primal questions that could potentially arise in that situation.